Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is How to Bass 21 Live. Cue SNL band. Today we're going to talk about Vocodex, in the sense that it is a vocoder. We're going to use it to do pretty popular and commonly used bass techniques, and I'm going to explain how that works. So monotone. I'm monotone apparently. If you're watching this, there's some chat options you have, and you can chat with me using the IRC that are linked on all the places I announced I'm having a chat, or the actual chat in the Justin TV client. The IRC is there mostly for people who don't want to make an account in order to chat, but it's there, and I'll talk about what I'm going to talk about, and I'll take questions, and then we'll see where the day takes us. Okay, so what do I mean by Vocodex vocoder bass? Well, I can play an example, and just so that I don't create copyright problems, I'll play one of mine. Doop. All right, plenty of that you just heard was the Vocodex stuff, so we'll make that a thing. So what is Vocodex? Vocodex is a vocoder, as I said before, and vocoders work largely in the same way from one to another, and that is there is a carrier and a modulator. Now you hear the terms carrier and modulator often, like you would also in FM synthesis, as there's a carrier and a modulator. The carrier is the primary sound, and the modulator is what's modulating the sound, creating the end result. And Vocodex and vocoders in general were originally designed to modulate a carrier sound with a voice. And you hear this effect sometimes on someone like Peter Frampton playing guitar, and you have the weird voicey guitar kind of sound, and that's a vocoder. That's a guitar-focused vocoder. And so that's what I tend to do, is I tend to vocode a carrier with a vocal sample, and there's plenty in FL that you could just use. And I do. You could also like record your own voice. Like if you have, like me right now, a mic set up, I could record my voice and then vocode something using that. That's an option. Or you could even just vocode something by itself, and that itself can even create interesting results. But today I'll be focusing on the primary purpose, which is to vocode a thing, usually as I was speaking about it, a bass with a voice. So let's start by making a bass. I'm using Citrus, and I'm going to make it FM type bass, but it doesn't have to be this bass, but I just find that the formanty, vowel-y modulation that FM offers actually kind of complements the vocoding process. So that's why I'm doing that. So first I'm going to make an FM bass, just your usual popular EDM style vocoder, FM bass, because I can talk when I'm doing things at the same time, I promise. I have like 600 tutorials on how to do exactly what I'm doing right now, and if this is something that you're interested in, I recommend How to Bass 4 in my channel, my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/SeamlessR, and that will teach you how to do pretty much everything that I just did right now, which is make this FM bass. I'm putting it. Let's do F sharp. I'm kind of in with F sharp lately. So I'm actually going to take the FM just a little bit further to demonstrate the vocoder stuff, and I'll explain why in a minute when I finish making automation. So when you're making a vocoder carrier, it's good to have a lot of presence in the frequency spectrum. Like the bass that I just used, as you can tell, it doesn't have a whole lot of high frequencies going on. I mean, I could just EQ it, and then it would. But you also want more things going on up there, so that when the vocal modulation is going to take away a lot of what's in the bass. So you want there to be a lot to begin with. And it might not necessarily work as a main bass by itself as a result of this, but it will still work pretty well as a vocoder carrier. So, and to do this, what I'm going to do is in the FM here, I made this work by having the main output be a sine wave, the fundamental FM modulator being fundamental. It's the same pitch, and then I also have a high frequency modulator, which is creating the formaty vowel movement. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to modulate the frequency of the higher frequency harmonic here by a fundamental frequency note. And watch what happens when I do. Now, that's usually good enough on its own, but for added fun, I'm going to make that its own automation as well. So what Citrus does is that it controls the modulation input of an operator. So operator 1's modulation input is coming in from 2 and 3, but I want to control 3's modulation, so I'm going to map that to Y. Just going to make it max. So. And that lets you do fun stuff like this. And that, of course, will give you more options for vocoder modulation later. And it'll also, like I said, increases the high frequency activity. I'm still going to EQ it up a little bit. Now, also want a little bit of sub reinforcement, so I'm just going to also put 4 out. Actually, no, I'm not, because I'm using that, and 5 out. And what I mean by using that, I mean that I'm going to modulate the volume of the sub reinforcement, because the sub only goes away when the mod input is all the way up, and when it's down, it's just back to being a normal sine, which is kind of as much sub as you can get. So I don't want that to stack. So I'm just going to make 5 go up in volume as the main modulation goes up as well. I should keep the sub nice and even. So now that I have that, and this weird window artifact, all right, it's gone. I'm going to, see, I already have it. Okay, so now I'm going to route this into the Vocodex channel by routing like that. So, like I said earlier, you can do vocoder by just having it only on one thing, and it'll use the same input as the modulator and the carrier, as determined by up here. You have input routing, and you can have none and 0 and 1, which I guess are the same for this moment. So you can also do left-right encoding, which is actually how most vocoders work. Is you have a left input and a right input, and then that determines which one is a carrier and which one is a modulator. That's also how the older fruity vocoder worked, which is, that's how this guy worked. And this is not anywhere near as powerful as the Vocodex. All right, so now I want to have a modulator. So let's use.
Oh yeah. Bring me to.
Oh yeah.
I tend to use.
Oh yeah.
I tend to use that particular one because there's a lot of reasons why FM8 doesn't sound the same as Citrus when you set it up the way that I did, and I can talk about that later, and I will, because it's a thing that needs to be said. But what was it? Oh yeah, so I tend to use the sample a lot. And the reason why I do is that it's a male voice, which means that I don't have to turn it low. I don't have to turn it too low to make it a lower sound, because when you're doing these sorts of basses, you generally want the lowest sound you can get before it gets to be too gurgly, because that's just what sounds more evil. That's kind of what we're going for. But it's often not the most defined of formant characteristics or vowels, and so then you'd think, oh, let's go to
Oh, are you here to move?
some kind of female sound. But if you do that, you have to bring it down lower to make it the same kind of evil sound, and if you do that, you lose a lot of the high frequency activity. And there's ways to get around that in Vocodex, and I'll explain how in a second. It's a bit more of an advanced idea, but for now I'm just going to use the male voice, which has all the high frequencies and is also appropriately low. So I'm gonna label this one mod, and the bass. That's like loud as hell. Holy shit. I just routed the mod into my vocal input because I'm smart. Okay. Let's label my tracks, because this is why you do that kind of stuff, so that you don't lose track of what you're doing. FM bass. All right, so modulator and the FM bass are both going into Vocodex. So that means that now when I right click on this, it has the labeled inserts in the carrier modulator selectors, and that's very helpful. So modulator, mod, carrier, FM bass, and enabling the modulator. All right, so now you're greeted. This is. I mean, there's also usually draft is on, but I'm turning draft off so that I can hear what it sounds like. You can also keep draft on. It doesn't particularly matter right now because it's playing it. It's playing. Blah. There's. I'll talk about FM8, but what's it? I'm distracting myself by things that I don't need to be looking at right now when I'm trying to talk about stuff. Anyway, this is what you're greeted with when you first turn on. Oh, and now my laptop wants to restart. Go away. It wouldn't actually kill the stream if it did, but it would kill my connection to the chat, which is important because I'm trying to interact with you guys. Vocodex, when you open it and you turn it on and you plug stuff in, this is what you're greeted with. This is the setup that you get. Minus that little blemish I just put. So how do you make it not this? How do you make it something useful? Well, in vocoders, actually that's a good point. Let's talk about what is happening when you vocode something. So, all right, okay. I kind of want that to stay there, but what you see when the sound is active is a whole bunch of bands. Now, what these bands are, you can see the count, how many bands there are. What that is basically the analysis, the equalizer analysis of the modulator. So like if we were to look at the modulator, EQ, put that over here. You can kind of see how that lines up. So that's basically what the vocoder is doing, is that it's applying the analysis of the spectrum analysis of the modulator over the carrier as an EQ, and it's doing that by having bands. It's kind of like how a visualizer works. Like when you look, I mean, even like any the EQ visualization here is detecting how much amplitude there is at what part of the spectrum, and then it's applying the amplitude to the visualization. And in the case of the vocoder, it's applying it to a band level. And this is one of the reasons why it's able to do that live, is because if you did just have one for every frequency, like if you had 44.1 thousand bands, that would be extremely process intensive. But if we're only at 47, or like 18 or whatever, or 64 that the other vocoder had, then it's kind of doable. Vocodex can go up to 100. And you notice how when I went down to 5 bands, it just sounded like the normal carrier. And that's actually a good point, because as the bands get smaller, they take up more space and they are thicker. The band thickness determines the overall character of the sound. So I'll go back to 47 bands, and I'm going to mess around with the bandwidth knob here, which controls the band thickness. Now, how many times have you heard that sound in a track? That kind of glassy sharpness in a bass sound. In fact, now that you're familiar with that sound, that you've heard the sound, think about how many like modern and recent tracks that you've heard that sound in, and that should clue you into how much of the bass processing that goes on in modern tracks is as a result of vocoder. So let's continue with how things work. So let me get this bandwidth multiplier thing, the option here. Basically, it smooths it one way or another. All the way down is that it does its best to stick to what the modulator is doing, and then over here it makes it really wide. And doing that will weight the characteristic between sounding like the modulator and sounding like the carrier. Now, okay, so then the next thing is where we can also further determine how the sound works. We got the modulator pitch shift. Now, this doesn't actually change the pitch of the modulator, which is important to know. It moves the band positions as a result that the pitch is the modulator is creating. So it's not actually changing the pitch. But if you did change the pitch of the modulator, that's the effect that it would have. And that's why I said earlier about how if you used a high pitched female voice as your modulator and then pitched it down, all the high frequency information would go away and it'd be like you just high passed everything. So there's that. And then there's this unison control here. And now as I mentioned before, when you change the pitch of the pitch shift of the modulator, it doesn't change the actual modulator pitch, it just moves the bands. That's what the unison does. This is a unison control, and it goes up to 5 voices. But what it does is it does like you would in a normal unison. It splits pitch. It like detunes the sound, and if you do that in the Vocodex, it splits the bands. It makes the bands move around a little bit, like as according to how the pitch would have gone if you had done this to the modulator. When I do maximum stereo separation, you could probably hear how one side was kind of low and one side was kind of high, and that's what that's doing. That's good to know. That's cool to mess with. Now, this here is filter fatness, and basically what that determines is how sharp the bands are. Not necessarily the band width, but like how sharp they are. Like you have this kind of tip going on here, and that's more or less what that's doing. I'm not 100% on what the shapes are actually doing in terms of the sound character, but it's pretty obvious when you listen to it. And for that, I'm going to increase the order so that it's more obvious. I am aware that the difference is not making itself apparent, and I'm trying to figure out why. Alright, there we go. I suppose you have to have the modulator pitch, or what is it? Bandwidth multiplier. Yeah. I'm not used to having to call these things. I just look at them at my brain, and I'm like, oh, the mouth thing. Oh, the guy-girl thing. Oh, the more than one person thing. That's kind of how I'm used to interpreting that in my mind. So you can hear it's kind of sharp. It gets less sharp. It's still kind of sharp because really the overall sharp characteristic is determined by the bandwidth multiplier. The bandwidth knob, not the bandwidth multiplier, which is this guy, this bandwidth setup. So I'm going to keep it on order 4 just because I like that. Now, okay, so over here we have a hold, attack, and release. Now, what these are basically the ADSR controls for, I guess it is ASDR, isn't it? Whatever. It's the envelope controls for the bands. And so, if I were to... See how that works. Now, the reason why this has min times here and it's enabled by default is because when you don't have it enabled and you have really short times, that happens. Now, if you have really tight control over what that's doing, you can make it some pretty advanced sounds. And it also has a little bit to do with what the bandwidth is and how many bands that you have. Right. Anyway, you can kind of hear how we're already getting a kind of mean sound. The sound is kind of mean. However, there are more and deeper things you can do with Vocodex, and that has to do with this drop-down menu here. By default, you're on the band gain multiplier, and that serves more or less as an overall EQ for the Vocodex sound. Now you kind of notice how it's sort of cut here. It's also kind of quiet over here. That's basically your bass, and if you want there to still be bass, you can also mix in carrier, modulator, and also some noise, which I don't really mess with ever. There's also some contour options, which I also haven't messed with, but you might find some success if you attempt to mess with that. I just haven't because a lot of my more recent sounds I use with Vocodex that don't use the "oh yeah" sample have used like an FM bass to modulate something that's not an FM bass, and that creates some interesting results. And there aren't really consonants or like normal vocal properties that a FM bass has, so that's why I don't do that. But I'm gonna turn down the wet, and so here you notice by default that the carrier has a low pass filter on it, and then the modulator by default has a high pass filter on it. And this is because the Vocodex was kind of designed around not dealing with the highest or the lowest of frequencies in its processing, so that you don't have to really mess with that. You can change that in the band distribution, because as you can see, it's by default it doesn't go that low, but you can change it. As you can see, it like it does it here, kind of applies down there, but not to great effect. So if you engage the carrier in the mix, you can also hear how it kind of makes sound after that when I have the carrier engaged. That's because there's no modulator. And when you have a standard vocoder setup, if the modulator and the carrier aren't playing, there will not be sound, because according to the vocoder, the information that's getting from the modulator when it's not making sound is that there's no activity on any bands, and so it's going to be silence. So for the sake of also, you notice how this sharp cut here kind of created a sharpness in the automation. That's because it didn't make it. That's because it didn't actually make a sharpness in the automation. It made the sharpness in how the modulator is interpreted. And that's important to note, because that means you can do cool things like if you automate the volume of the modulator, you can make more automation as well. If you do fun cuts in the modulator, then you can get perhaps a little more done in terms of interesting sounds. That kind of involves a lot of experimentation, but that's just, I want to put that bug in your ear, because bugs are gross. And I want that in your ear because I'm gross. Anyway, back to the drop-down menus, the truly important thing. So we have band gain multiplier. It's basically the EQ. Kind of important. Next one is band panning. And again, we're greeted with a line editor. And what this does is it can pan individual sections of bands left or right. That can help you make very fine-tuned changes to your stereo presence, which is always important for everything that you do ever. Band gain offset. Not 100% why this is different from the band gain multiplier, but it's here. I'm sure the manual speaks as to why that's even a thing. Modulator noise and modulator pass-through, and these do more or less what you think they do. For our purposes, that's not necessarily important, but it's there. Okay, now here's where we get to be some fun stuff. So we have the envelope follower. Now these are all basically line and like spectrum specific representation of these three knobs up here. So we have the hold, and so if we can change the hold values of particular bands. Which doesn't have a huge effect when there's also some attack and release going on, but you can see how that would be important if I go, like, for example, into the release window. You can clearly see how there's more release in these sections than there is in the section in the middle. I turn it up and I'm exaggerating it to make it visually noticeable, so that you can see the differences. But that kind of effect, if I had other things going on, would have a very profound effect on your sound. But it hasn't yet because I haven't gotten to these three. Band distribution, which I already said what that does earlier, and then bandwidth. And this is the per spectrum control of this knob over here. I keep going up there to try and go this step edit mode. And that has a much more important effect on your sound, because the bandwidth is really what controls the primary character of the vocoder's application. Words, use them. Band gain multiplier. What, this thing? That's the bandwidth. Band gain multiplier. Well, yeah, this is mostly just an EQ. I usually don't mess with this, and I just go and I EQ it. Like I just EQ. Like I kind of want there to be more high end just then, but yeah. Oh my god. I'm doing smart things right now. And that, no, I'm not doing smart things. Okay. Did that adequately explain the band gain multiplier area? I believe I did. Okay. Dupe. Where the hell was I? Okay, bandwidth, I showed you what that did. Modulator pitch shift. So this is where things get really cool. This is where, like for example, if I did want to use a higher female voice, like I will just to explain.
Oh, are you here to move?
Dude, oops, not what I want to do. Cut. So what channel are you in? 4? Okay. So now watch what happens when I Vocodex using a female voice. It sounds kind of high, but I want it to be low because it's a bass, right? So let's make it low. And I lose all high definition, high frequency definition. And so this is the modulator pitch shift line editor. So that means that I can move particular points of the spectrum and move those bands up and down, but leave the rest there. So and that is Vocodex's most powerful modulation tool, in my opinion. In my personal opinion, because that solves a lot of problems that you'll have with normal vocoders if you don't have that kind of option. And now that sounds ridiculous. So, what's left? So saturation, mix, and saturation curve. So saturation mix, you mix, it's the spectrum level of the saturation, which doesn't do anything because the saturation curve hasn't been changed. So I'm going to... And what that's kind of doing is more or less like the modulator bandwidth multiplier, is that when you increase the saturation in a particular area, it widens the band information, not the bandwidth, but the band information. That's to say that if there was a band that was only this wide, originally. Like if that's what the modulator input originally said, if I were to make this huge saturation curve here, it would make the band suddenly like this, would make the band information. So there'd be a whole bunch of bands all out doing that. And that would make that particular section more like the carrier than the section was before. I tend not to use that a whole lot just because I don't really care what the carrier sounds like when I'm making the vocoder with this particular bass in mind. But that's what that does. Freaking step edit. And the curve determines like the kind of it's like a wave shaping curve. It determines the kind of saturation it is, and you can make interesting shapes and it'll do interesting things, but not really that interesting because the effect would still be kind of the same. But that's what that is. That's what that is there for to do. So now once you've set things like the modulator pitch shift and the bandwidth, like I said, I didn't really mess with that, but I will now just for shits. So now we have that weird kind of underwater balloon sound going on, and this is where the band gain multiplier also comes in handy as a kind of internal EQ. And I say that as an internal EQ because if I were to use the EQ to solve the problem I'm about to discuss, I would also lose the carrier output that's going on here. So what am I talking about? If you look at the little information bar up here, it'll tell you which frequency you're at in the spectrum here, and it'll also tell you that up here as well. And so I checked to see that this was around the same area that is being cut, and that's so that the carrier, the base of the carrier is basically completely replacing the Vocodex output. Now, I hope the reason why I didn't go all the way down is because there's a bug in the beta, which I'm not using right now, but there is a bug that if I go all the way down, it makes a terrible noise. A terrible, terrible noise. I don't want to do that just in case that happens because that would be awful for you guys. But you can't just cut it and go all the way down and no one will care. So now that I've done all this, now the filter fatness control kind of starts making obvious changes. Yeah. That's more or less something that you set by ear just because what it does, its primary function is more or less like technically handled by the bandwidth control and a bandwidth multiplier, but sometimes some kind of subtleness will help you. Also, the character of your sound, obviously, as just demonstrated, is greatly changed by how many bands you have going on. So, like, if I had 100... versus, like, 30-ish. Also, remember that kind of squishiness that we're hearing is not actually from the vocoder. It's from the... secondary FM in the carrier. As I demonstrated earlier, and I'll talk about that when I finish the primary Vocodex lesson that I'm talking about right now. Okay, so this thing here basically switches between detecting pitch or RMS of the modulator, and for hold mode here, and then these are release and attack curve differences. So over here it's this curve, and over here it's this curve, and then in between is how much it's that curve or that curve, and that I have discovered if you're using it on the release curve anyway, and it's kind of low, it has more of a watery kind of sound. And whatnot. Okay, I think I covered all the main points. The order here is basically just how hard the effect is applied. This button, it follows the modulator pitch shift. And I believe it's on most things. Except, of course, the modulator control. It's already engaged for the modulator pass-through. Because it's about the modulator. It's not really something that I use a whole lot. It's because I feel like its prescribed purpose doesn't really matter for what I'm doing with it. Let's check what the manual says. Scroll, you fool. Well, I guess it's not going to do that. Parameters. Where is it? Envelope follower. No. Okay, follows modulator pitch shift. This is what we're looking at. Lips. Look at it. It's right there. Lips. Per mapping envelope switch links the mapping envelope frequency scale to the modulator pitch shift knob. Okay. Will follow the original target frequencies. Modulator's pitch shift is adjusted when deselected. Mapping envelope remains at the original fixed frequencies while the modulator pitch shift moves native to it. Okay, I kind of get what's going on. I kind of get. All right. But if that's the case, then if I were to engage it, it should do something interesting. Okay, so the difference is somewhat subtle, but it seems... Well, that's kind of what I thought, anyway. Last time I tried doing that, I didn't really do much, but... so there's that. Does anyone have any questions regarding Vocodex? I believe I've covered... Like, the reason why I'm explaining it as hard as I am like this, per all that, is because every vocoder has the same purpose. It has more or less the same control types. It has, and it's usually how many bands there are and bandwidth. That's usually the, like, for example, I'm pretty sure it's all that you get in TAL, the TAL vocoder. But as long as you understand what those do and how those work, you should be able to apply the knowledge of Vocodex to other vocoders. They just might not be as awesome because Vocodex has all these line editors and per spectrum area changes that you can do. So, any questions? Questions? Any of them? Any questions? Looking at you, chat. Is there anyone left? Yeah, at least I hope I'm recording. Yep, I'm totally recording. Yep, there'll be a YouTube video with this. All right, left, right encoders. What you got? I'm looking at you, Savalampi? Savalampi? Savilampi? Sav. I'm calling you Sav. Sav has a question about the left-right encoding. Okay, well, the way the left-right encoding works is that you... other question. I'll answer that in a second. So left-right encoding works by you engage it, and then if I wanted this to work that it would, I have to pan the carrier and the modulator left or right, and then that determines... I did it wrong in that position, but then you see how it worked like that, because that means that it detects that the left or the right. In this case, the right is the carrier and left is the carrier and right is the modulator, and so that means that everything that goes into the left channel will be regarded as a modulator, or as the carrier, as the modulator. Bleh. Everything that goes into one channel will be determined as a modulator. Everything that goes in the other channel will be determined as a carrier, and like every single thing. And so you can do neat things like you can move around the panning of the carrier and the modulator, and that would create not potentially desirable effects, and I don't think. I mean, it might. Or you can run more than one thing into it, and then. But you can also do that in the normal method. You could put more one thing into each channel. Like if I put another bass in there or another modulator in there, it'd be kind of the same effect. And then you can just control volume levels of each of those as opposed to panning levels of another. However, with panning, you can do cool stuff like if I do this correctly again. Like if I were to just let it go. And I guess if you do it intelligently, you can kind of get neat effects out of doing that. I'm seeing a series of graphs that changes some aspect of sound, but is there a general criterion to modify them? He'll create FM-based second channel. Modulate the first and the second channel plays a triangle way because it makes more sharp difference. And goodbye, Sopkya. You are welcome. Sopkya. Reading names. All right, so like the modulator pitch shift, for example, the criteria I have for messing with that is that I want the bass to sound lower. And in order for that to happen, I have to have the modulator modulate it lower. But if I were to just turn the pitch shift down, I might lose some of the definition and information that I was getting out of the high frequencies. So if I pitch it down, I could pitch up the areas that were in the high frequencies originally and then pitch everything else down. And so that gives me greater control, I guess, over the formant. It's greater formant control. And the gain multiplier, it's all like what you want to have to do. Like if you have a purpose, which is I don't want 400 hertz and below to make a sound, then I cut the gain multiplier. Or if I want 400 hertz or whatever to stay what they were doing and not go any lower because they would make the sound weirder, then I could keep them there, but pitch everything else in different directions. Same thing with panning. It's like if I want to have a more stable stereo separation, like if I were to just use the onboard user control, it's kind of unbalanced. So I could go into the band panning and manually try and balance it out until it became something more agreeable. And then also the bandwidth controller. What the bandwidth controller does is that if the bandwidth is wide, it sounds more like the carrier because there's not a lot of difference in the analysis being applied to it. But if the bands are thin, then there's more analysis, more obvious analysis being applied to it because right now, as you can see, the curve, this red curve going on here. That's another lesson in the filter fatness. There is that when it's all the way up there, it's not too sharp, but if it's down, it kind of is. I believe, did I answer your question? I hope I did. That was my attempt to answer your question. Doop-a-doo. Man, is it? I wonder how long the lag is between saying something and something happening. I guess The stream inception I did earlier kind of showed it. It wasn't that long. It was maybe like 7 or 8 seconds. Because the internet is amazing if you really think about it. It's really fast. But I hope that I have answered your question. That was my hope. Okay, thanks, he says. I say you're welcome. All right. I'm calling the Vocodex topic gooded. It's been good. Sticking a fork in it. I'll put up this project that I was just messing with to explain this to you so that you can look at it if you need to. I'll put it up when I put up the video, which would be immediately when I'm done doing this. So the next thing I want to address is how to make FM8 do the stuff that I do in Citrus. That is an often asked for thing. All right, so making FM8 has the same kind of matrix control that Citrus does. It's organized a bit differently, but it's more or less the same thing. So like right now, the default position is to have F go all out at 80%. Now, what do I prefer? I prefer Citrus 100%. If it weren't for the fact that FM8 could, it can FM incoming audio if you load it in as an effect channel. That's something that Citrus can't do, and that's kind of an awesome thing. But I still think Citrus is better just because it's more straightforward as an FM synth. FM8 has included plugins and stuff that are effects and whatnot that make it a more complete package, but as just an FM synth, I believe Citrus does it better. So the first thing to realize about each of these operators is that they're not actually at maximum volume to start off with. I don't mean that by this 80% thing. I mean the velocity is not all the way up to start. And it's important to know because like how harsh the FM sound that I made earlier is how harsh and like how solid that is completely the result of how loud it gets. Like if I were to make this any louder than this, for example, it's all about okay, that's something that you need to realize about FM is that FM, which means frequency modulation, is about volume. It's about amplitude. I don't mean like it modulates amplitude. I mean like by how much and how hard the frequency is being modulated is determined by how loud the modulation input is. Like how like the amplitude basically. So like here up 2 is all the way in there, and if I were to bring it down, it's not so much that the modulation is going down, it's that it's being routed into it quieter. So I can also achieve the same effect by changing the volume. At center position, the volume's at 0. You can see up here in the information tab that does that because it goes from 0 to negative 100. And the reason why it does that is because this goes from, I'm at negative 100 right now, but either direction is positive or negative. So you want to have that same functionality in the primary volume control. So that's why that's there. And that's how FM8 works, is that the level at which it goes and does things is determined by the amplitude and the overall volume. And if you notice that if you modulate if I were to get rid of the high harmonic here and go into the same. Alright. The other thing that Citrus has over FM8 is that you can make your own waveforms, whereas in FM8 you gotta pick yours. But I mean, I do everything I do with normal, like straight up triangle waves. So what, like even if I were to match the levels, I've also got the extra sound coming out. Here's a question, is this? It see how that the kind of bubbly higher frequency is not there, and that's not because it's a different frequency. It's because it's not the same level. And then there it is because I made it louder. So that's a pretty important thing. And now the other thing that's weird about FM8 is that Citrus has pretty defined modulation controls. I guess there's amp. You can do amp mod here. I believe that's what this does. Is that it controls. Oh, come on, man. Yeah. Okay. Of course, the mod wheel by default also controls weird pitch doings. I don't want to do that. I don't know where it is because I don't know if I made all that well. Portamento? I think it's what it's. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just gonna do that for now. Back to expert, because you're experts now. Yeah. So, like in Citrus, I want to route the fundamental frequency and also the high harmonic. Now, also something to know when you're trying to copy sounds in Citrus and FM8 based on what you're watching me do is that Citrus by default has all the pitches at ratio 2. FM8 by default has all the pitches at ratio 1. And this is super important because in order to make the same kind of sound on ratio 2 that I did with the high harmonic at 60, I mod button. What? Oh, pitch. Look at that. Go away. Thanks for that. Saying about stuff. Oh yeah, so if you want to do a high harmonic that's at 60 on ratio 2, that means that's actually going to be on 30 on ratio 1. Because if you did 60, it would sound kind of bad. But also, last time I tried this, FM8 had some kind of ordering concerns about which one goes in first. Citrus doesn't appear to have that kind of concern. I'm not 100% sure why, but FM8 does. And I don't remember which one it is. I'm just going to try to do it with D and see what happens. All right. So D. Let's put your mod up. Also put your pitch up because that's what the whole point of doing this. To 30. Totally still doing that pitch thing. Is it individual or something? Like, I'm confused. That's still there. That's because I had to do that originally. I'm a smart person. I'm the one that you guys are watching the stream of telling you how to do stuff, and here I am doing weird stuff. I make no apologies. Oh man, I'm just gonna make some MIDI information because that sticking is pissing me off. All right. So, if you don't already know this, in FL Studio, when you want to automate something that's not a FL native plugin, you gotta move the wheel or whatever, and then go into Tools, and it says Last Tweaked, and then it will be like you right-clicked it. So now, let's make some automation so I can work. Why the hell was that pitch? What? Did I move the pitch mod by accident? I think I did. WTF, mate. All right, modulation, CC1. Okay, actually, here's another thing you can do. See how it says it's CC1 right there? I'm going to set the MIDI input port to port 1, and then I'm going to make a MIDI out. I'm going to set it to port 1. I'm going to make a knob, configure it to CC1. So now if I take this MIDI information and put it in here, and then put the center where it's supposed to be because I moved it. totally works. And then you can right click, create an automation clip, and now I can actually make automation as opposed to pretending like I am. Yoink. Good times. Yeah, I'm reading that guy's. Stockholm was pretty sweet. Thanks for showing up, Savalampi, whose name I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing with an enunciation that sounds weird, an accent that is, and so that I'm wording things correctly. Go back to ops. That's what I want to see. All right. That's more or less the correct sound. So then, of course, you can do what I did before, which was to modulate the secondary by the secondary high harmonic by the fundamental. Now you notice that I had to go into the amp mod here, and I had to make them for both for D and E, whereas in Citrus I can do just F input and it would work. That might be what this is. There might be a way to do what I just described, but that's the way I did it just now, and that's a way to make FM8 do what I think that you want it to do. That's a way. I really don't use FM8. It's not bad. FM8 is not bad. I mean, it's kind of hard to fuck up like something as simple as an FM synth. You know, it's kind of an old concept, and but it's mostly just like their interface just kind of bugs me. It's also not because it's bad. It's because I spent 8 years looking at this, and I'm used to this. That's what I'm used to. So it's not really Native Instruments' fault. I happen to like Native Instruments a lot. I own Complete. It's obviously, that's why I have FM8. I also have Massive. I don't really use Massive. I'll tell you why I don't use Massive. I'm going to bring up Massive to show you why I don't use Massive. So Massive is a wavetable synthesizer. Now what that means is that you go over here into oscillators and you have your list of oscillator types. These are all wavetables. So like if I go to say modern talking and turn off this envelope, the whole reason why I don't use Massive is because the wavetable sets, at least the ones that people tend to use the most, are mostly made by FM synthesis. And I like to actually make the sounds myself. And that's kind of a weird hipster, like elitist, like place to take on the matter, but that's more or less why I don't use it. And once again, I'm not saying that Massive is a bad synth. As a wavetable synth, it does a pretty sweet job because it lets you do modulation and stuff that would normally take you lots of like hours designing sounds and whatnot. Of course, there's something to be said about making all the sounds yourself and learning how to do all this kind of stuff, and then you can be good at it and you don't have to worry about it. But there's also something to be said to getting Nexus and just writing amazing songs all at once and not having to worry about sound design because your concern is the music and you want the music to sound good and you don't care how. Both camps have their point, and I'm on the make all your sounds point because that's what I do. I'm a sound designer, and I'm infinitely better at designing sounds than I am actually using them in songs. So that's why I don't use Massive. That's also why I don't make Massive tutorials, is because I'm not familiar with it at all, and so I can't do anything cool with it. Case in point, I had no idea how to make the Kill the Noise patch that I showed on How to Base 16. Someone else came up with that, and like I kind of felt bad that I didn't know how to do that because Massive, for its wavetable-ness, basically is it's a very limited palette. You can come up with some pretty creative things to do with Massive, but it's confined by the base, like the starting point of the wavetables themselves. And I feel accomplished as shit when I come out with something sweet because I made it myself. And that's why I do tutorials. It's because I know that's my worth. Well, that was about an hour. It was pretty cool. I covered a lot. I did the Vocodex thing. And, you know, what's funny is that on the EDM production Reddit, they started doing a thing where they have a how do I make this sound thread, and like I went in there and like the four like highest voted ones at the time were all answered by Vocodex bass, like vocoder bass. That's all they were like. How do I make this crazy growl? How do I make this crazy growl? How do I make that crazy growl? And they're all very different growls. They all sounded different, but they were all vocoders. And if you weren't familiar with that before watching this, go and listen to like your favorite like bro step banger club tracks, and then you'll start to hear vocoder processing everywhere on all the basses that ever happened. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm also not saying that doing the FM stuff is bad, because I mean that's in like how many tracks is that in? And what? Appear to have destroyed everything, but that's okay. I'll make that work before I put up the FLP. But you hear that kind of stuff all over the place. It's not necessarily bad to do that, to do things that people have done. I mean, actually no, because it's kind of all I do. But it's just important to know the basics. And I happen to consider Vocodex bass processing a basic. All right. So does anyone have questions? I ask, looking towards the chat, of which I think there are like 3 people in currently. It should tell me in a second. There are some people. There are some peeps. And of course I'll put this on YouTube and people will be sitting here for like 4 minutes of me not... Well, that was easy. All right. Inbox. I'm still streaming. I mean, now that I realize that I can totally just edit stuff when I'm done. I don't really care about how long things are taking. Actually, I should probably check my hard drive space. Totally good. Especially considering the last video was kind of small for how large it was. Really? Okay, I'm gonna talk about something funny about Knife Party and Rob Swire, who is Knife Party. If you don't know that, Rob Swire, who was also Pendulum, and okay, when Kill the Noise Part 1 came out, I actually didn't hear it when it came out, but I came in late to the party for that matter. But there was apparently a Twitter thing where Rob Swire like had his mind blown about Kill the Noise. And he said something like, if you tell me that you made those sounds with FM8, I'll throw my hard drive into the ocean. And then Madian replied to that being like, +1. And then Kill the Noise was like, oh, he's massive. And I was 100% surprised that Rob Swire didn't just immediately know how to do all that. And in fact, I had assumed, like, because Knife Party's first or second EP that they put out was called 100% No Modern Talking. That's a joke about not using Massive, or at least not using Modern Talking in Massive. And yet that EP was full of all kinds of FM-based modulation sounds. So I was like, oh, he didn't use Modern Talking, and he made the Modern Talking sound anyway to show off that he knew what he was doing. That's what I thought. That's what I thought that was about. That's what I thought the point was. So when he was all like, I don't know about, and he flips out about the fact that Kill the Noise used Massive, he used Modern Talking to make the Kill the Noise sound, the bass that he used on everything ever. And then of course other stuff like, if you listen to it now, you can also totally hear vocoder modulation and stuff like that. But like Knife Party sounds, yeah. So one particular sound that I like at Knife Party is the remix that he did of Unison the Porter Robinson track, I think. I forget who made Unison, but they did a remix of that, and like the main chorus bass sound for that was really epic. It was really, yeah, it was Porter. Okay, so it was Porter Robinson. So it was really nice. It was really excellently made sound, and I really feel like that it was a combination of like vocoder processing, but I also feel like it was just a sound. I feel like you just went you just made a sound and then like rhythmically cut it up, and that's really all that was. It wasn't necessarily any kind of extremely advanced synth programming that made it make that sound. It was probably just he made the sound, he thought it sounded cool, EQ'd it, maybe pitched it, maybe put it in Harmor, and did some cool stuff with it. I don't think Harmor was out back then, but you know what I mean. Maybe did some stuff, but I'm pretty sure it was from a sample that they created. I don't really think that was much about synthesis. I'll explain what I mean about Harmor in a second. I'm still trying to read this guy's post. Because, yeah, 1 second. I will respond to you later. And I don't want to start talking about that, but it totally is something I need to talk about in public at some point, because that's a thing. That's a thing. Let's just say it's a thing that I get asked a lot. And that, whatever, I'll respond later. So let me talk about what I mean about putting the sample in Harmor. Whoa, shit. I guess technically it's a form of resampling, but it's not resampling in the way that I usually refer to resampling. Like, I'm going to demonstrate this by recording a sound using my voice. Bleh. Bleh. Whatever. Good enough. I'm going to denoise it. Get rid of this guy. Don't need that. Yeah, I bet that was interesting, wasn't it? Okay. All right. I'm also going to go to Tools and normalize it. That's better. That does sound. All right. Doo-ba-doo. Harmor. So now, like doing anything in Harmor, I'm going to lose it because I put it in the audio clips folder by accident. So basically right now it's doing its best to just play the sound as it is, because it's at C5, so it's kind of what it's doing. Laughing at the chat. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to make it a playable sound, and I'm going to do that by changing the scale. So watch what happens when I do that. Suddenly sound. Wow, that kind of sounds like a nice growl bass, doesn't it? So what other things can I do with this? So watch what happens. Basically right now it's repitching the sound, but it's keeping it to the pitch. However, I can engage the formants, and it'll keep the formant information across all pitches. And you kind of hear it sounds kind of washy, like really like not all that great. Well, you can change that by going to the sharpness knob and bring that down. And also, let's say you don't want it to make that modulation, except for when you want it to modulate. You can pick the speed, bring it all the way down. You can map the time to X. However, watch what happens when I move X as time is mapped. It actually played through it twice for how long this is. So that means that we actually need to move the mapping to be about half. And a little bit less than max and a little bit more than minimum at the middle here, because if I did that, it would for some reason go past the beginning and the end. But that's what I'm doing that for now. So. So now that I also have the formants engaged, we can do some more cool things, like going into Okay. Last time I did this, I realized that people told me that you couldn't see the drop-down menus when I did this. So I'm opening this drop-down menu, and in the third column, it says Image Format Mutation. So I'm clicking the Image Format Mutation, and that's what this does. Now this is a lot like the modulator pitch shift window editor that you get in Vocodex, and you'll see why in a second. Whatever, that's cool. All the time. Actually, I was talking to one earlier today, and that's exactly what they told me, is that they resampled like animal sounds in their voice. I'm not going to say who it is because they might not want me telling you that. So I'm going to withhold that information for now. What was I about to do? I want to see what it sounds like if I distort it. Probably not very good. Well, not good in the traditional sense, but that might be something people want anyway. Now I'm going to try unison. And like I normally do with unison, I'm going to go into the harmonic unison pitch, which is again in the third column of the menus that you probably can't see. Oh, yeah, mix. Of course, there is also something to be said for leaving it without the format changes. Because that, personally to me, kind of sounds way better than... But, like, again, if I try to go high, it wouldn't quite work. You can also do a combination. I could also reinforce it with a bit of a extra sub, but if I were to distort it, that might sound better now. Only not because B is not being modulated at all. It's very flat. Also, you notice how up here there's not any high frequency activity. That has to do with how the formats are engaged. Or not. I guess it just hates me. I also just realized I didn't turn on high precision here, and that's changed it quite a bit, didn't it? In fact, I would actually consider having high definition, high precision on, and generic on are actually two different tonal types that have their own merits for different reasons. But whatever, I'm just digging around trying to make stupid sounds. Does anyone have any other questions about anything that I might be able to ask or answer, rather, for anything? Now that I guess I've completed the primary purpose of today's stream. Oh crap, voicemail. It's probably Gabe. I have spent all the time with Harmor. KRK SC8s. It's Gabe. Have to call him back. Anyway, yeah, I have KRK ST8s. They're passives. And the reason why I got passives is because I happen to have a PA that works for this purpose, and the theory is that if I spent the money on something that was basically just a speaker, as opposed to a speaker and an amp combined, that I would get better speakers for it. I also got them refurbished, and there was apparently a blemish on them somewhere, although I haven't found it yet, and I got them at a discounted rate, so it was a pretty sweet deal. I kind of enjoyed that. I dare not turn on Skype. Let's move the microphone so they can hear what I'm saying. All right, I'm actually going to turn off recording now. Oh.